A shadow of the sovereign she once was, Marie Antoinette maintains a queenly dignity as she is paraded through the streets of Paris. Her name and the charges against her are read out. The last Queen of France is dead. Several days later, following countless more executions, a member of the National Convention notes the pointless waste of life as one after another of his colleagues are lost to the guillotine. The revolution is like Saturn, devouring its own children, he says. Danton sniffs.
Revolutions, my friend, cannot be made with rose water.
The bloodshed has only just begun. September 1793. 4 years into the revolution, and France is being torn apart. There is violent insurrection in the provinces, and huge losses in the faltering war against Europe. In one blistering defeat, the British Navy takes the port city of Toulon. Europe is eating away at France's borders.
France is the single largest country in Western Europe. It's the most populous country in Western Europe. It has been the great military power. And of course, when it entered into the revolution, a lot of its traditional enemies and also a lot of its traditional allies thought, aha, this is our chance to, not to carve a piece off of the actual territory of France, but certainly to enrich ourselves at its expense and to weaken it permanently.
France is isolated in the whole of Europe. It's being blockaded by Britain. It's being attacked and invaded by Austria and by Prussia. The people of Paris are seized by a fear that the victory of the counter-revolution will lead to a bloodbath.
Danton and Robespierre, the star orators of the convention, realize that they must boldly strike out to save the revolution. They convince their colleagues to institute a menacing new form of martial law.
It is time for all Frenchmen to enjoy sacred equality. It is time to impose this equality by signal acts of justice upon traitors and conspirators. Make terror the order of the day.
Thus begins a new chapter in the revolution, a period of violent repression called the Terror. In a remarkable reversal, the revolutionaries suspend the new constitution and all the rights it was to guarantee. Police spies scatter throughout the country. Anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activity is rounded up, quickly tried, and sent to the national razor.
The Reign of Terror was conceived as an emergency government. What they understood by terror was striking terror into the hearts of the enemies of the Republic, so that they would be either scared straight, as it were, or arrested and disposed of.
The slightest suspicion can send anyone to the scaffold. Politicians who say a kind word of the defunct monarchy. Anyone who uses the formal monsieur or madame instead of the new form of address, citizen. The air is fraught with paranoia. Neighbors denounce neighbors. The incessant rolling of the death carts rattles through the streets of Paris.
Execution is absolutely hanging over people's heads in the sense that we know in Paris there are police spies, and there are quite a few police spies everywhere, standing in bread lines, listening to what the women are saying, and turning them in if they don't like what they hear. You could be turned in not just for complaining about the high price of bread, but you could be turned in supposedly even for not being enthusiastic enough about where things were going and the successes of the revolution. So just about anything that would stand out for commentary could get you into trouble.
The convention sets up a revolutionary tribunal, expediting trials and executions with ruthless efficiency. To consolidate power, they form a 12-man council and call it the Committee of Public Safety.
Ultimately, power had to be delegated to a smaller group, and that group became the Committee of Public Safety. Ultimately, it became 12 people who really ruled France as a kind of collective dictatorship.
With his masterful words and revolutionary vision, Robespierre soon emerges as the committee's fiercest guiding voice. And that voice is calling for more blood.
One of the paradoxes in Robespierre's political life is that he very early on is a passionate opponent of the death penalty. And of course, this is thrown back in his face later when he becomes an equally passionate proponent of terror and the guillotine. He never particularly responds to that except to say, well, times have changed.
The revolution has hardened Robespierre. Once an impassioned supporter of a free press, he now reinstates censorship, a vestige of the old regime. And with the church already under attack, Robespierre stands idly by as one of the most radical revolutionaries. Jacques-René Hébert proposes a new agenda: de-Christianization.
When the crisis of the war and internal rebellion is at its height, people begin to say the root of all the problem is priests, is religion. And what we've got to do if we're ever going to be safe against the enemies of revolution is destroy the power of the Catholic Church. Superstition, fanaticism, that's what religion is all about, and therefore what we have to do is stamp out this whole thing entirely.
Streets carrying the word saint are renamed. Religious icons are destroyed and replaced with tributes to the new saint, Marat.
The church came to seem simply the enemy to the radical revolutionaries. Churches and cathedrals are simply stripped of their altars. Stained glass is smashed, statues are smashed. The wealth of the churches is simply carted off. Of course, for European opinion, this was something even more shocking than the death of the king.
Not even the Christian calendar is spared. Years are numbered no longer from the birth of Christ, but from September 1792, the overthrow of the monarchy. It is now year 1. Months are renamed according to the seasons. July becomes Thermidor, April, Floréal. Months are broken into 3 weeks of 10 days each.
The revolutionary calendar was certainly designed as a kind of weapon against Christianity, against Christian belief. Of course, by having a 10-day week, you'd no longer have Sundays, so people wouldn't even know what day Sunday was anymore. That's what they hoped.
The terror spreads across France. Insurrections are put down with a vicious, unrelenting cruelty. In the city of Lyon, where counter-revolutionaries are gaining ground, the Committee of Public Safety sets a brutal example. Hundreds of rebels are tied up, marched into fields, and mowed down en masse. A region called the Vendée in the west of France has also become a counter-revolutionary stronghold. Rebels and priests are tied together and packed onto boats that are then mercilessly sunk. Up to 100,000 people are killed in the Vendée alone. In Paris, the blade falls at an ever more frantic pace. But the French armies are finally seeing victories on the frontier. Under a brilliant young commander named Napoleon Bonaparte, the French army sends the British Navy into a demoralizing retreat at Toulon. The revolution is on the rise. Robespierre is at the height of his power. He has taken on the enemies of the revolution and ensured its success through terror.
For a time, the terror was very effective as a means of getting the country together, getting the government together, and fighting what was, after all, a war on several fronts. On the Eastern Front and on the Northern Front against external enemies, also a civil war in the Vendée, which was the bloodiest of all, also a civil war against the supporters of the Gironde and other revolutionaries who had turned against the government in Paris.
The Terror has achieved its goals, but it does not stop, and it will not stop until it devours the very man who unleashed it, Maximilien Robespierre.